Charisma Quotient. I'm your host, Kim Seltzer, a dating and makeover expert, where I will help you build confidence, make connections, and find love from the outside in. Are you a person who says yes to everything and anything that someone asks of you? In fact, the word no rarely comes out of you, even though in your gut, there are things it won't make you happy. It won't make you feel good, but you do it anyway, just so that you don't upset the other person. And then on top of it, you tend to overcommit to things you may not want to do and put way more emphasis on others over your own needs. Well, the truth is, you're probably a caretaker, you're a helper, you love helping just as much as you hate letting someone down. But when your default is set to yes, you will end up squashing the things that truly make you thrive and live your authentic life. And worse yet, attract unhealthy and lopsided relationships. And I see this all the time in my clients. And what, of course, I'm really talking about is setting boundaries. But why is it so hard to set boundaries? I mean, you want to be liked, you want to keep the peace, you want to avoid conflict. It's easier to just do things, right, than to ask for help. But you might be missing chances to invest time and energy in ways that benefit you. I remember there was a woman that I was working with. It wasn't too long ago, and she became one of my biggest success stories when it came to setting boundaries. She was the quintessential caretaker, and she was taking care of everybody. She was a doctor, so even in her profession, she was taking care of her patients, always doing everything for everyone in her friend circle too. She would always be the planner anytime things would pop up. And what was funny is she described herself as, well, very easygoing. She would just kind of like go with the flow, but that was part of her problem, And I said, what if you weren't so easy? What if you weren't always go with the flow girl and actually demanded more for yourself? And that was really hard for her because growing up, she was put in a position of the caretaker to care for her sick mom. And so that's again where her confidence lived. And then she had to really learn how to guess how other people felt because in her family system, people weren't expressing how they felt. And this affected her, throughout her adult life and also who she attracted. So lo and behold, she fell into a lot of toxic and narcissistic type of relationships. And so, the work that we did together, a lot of it was just taking care of her for the first time in her life, getting a little selfish, being in her sexy, investing in herself in new clothes, like all the things that she would put aside for herself. And I'll never forget when she got professional pictures and she saw herself like in those pictures. She's like, that's not me. She kept saying, that's not me. That's not me. I'm like, that is you, and get used to it and get used to other people seeing the new you. And she also would practice trusting her intuition and gut and saying no to things she didn't like and saying yes to the very things that she wanted to do, not because to please other people, but because it was something she truly wanted to do. Well, anyway, we really practiced just, having her own herself and setting boundaries as she was dating. And I'm happy to say she ended up with a great guy. And what was so cool about the guy that she attracted was for the first time, it was a reciprocal relationship because how she led into the relationship, she demanded more for herself. And that's why she attracted a guy who was happy to give that to her. So, in today's episode, we're going to talk a lot about setting healthy boundaries when dating, but with a touch of spirituality and intuition. Because I am bringing back on the show, oh my gosh, I don't even know how many times it's been. I think maybe the third or the fourth time. She's a dear friend. She is a celebrity psychic and an intuitive guide. She's a creative entrepreneur, and she's been featured all over like NBC, ABC, CBS. She's also an actress, a model. I mean, you name it, she has it. She also hosts a podcast, Healing Powers podcast, which I've been on many times. But she uses her experience to really help people. And she is just, I mean, a wealth of knowledge, but most of all, a dear friend. Welcome, Laura Michelle Powers. Are you there?
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to connect with you, having you on my show as well as being on yours.
I know we always have such a good discussion, and the time always flies by because we always go in these like different directions because I feel like there's so much synergy with what, we both do and we help people, but in different ways. So, I know you've been on the show a lot, but I'd love for you to share a little bit about your story and maybe even in relation to kind of the subject that we're talking about in the boundaries, because I know that you've had your own story with that and an evolution with it.
Absolutely. So we'll go way back to, how I started growing up. And I was actually born in France, and my parents were hippie musicians. So I grew up very, from a young age in this creative background. They would travel around and I would tour with them starting as a young girl. And there were a lot of wonderful aspects, was in France. We were in this creative work and traveling. But there was a dark side too, which was that my father was physically and emotionally abusive. And as a young girl, I really credit my grandmother, my father's mother, for taking action because she actually sent a telegram to my mom's parents saying trouble, and they literally came and kind of rescued us out of that situation. So,
Mm.
came to the United States as a young girl. And I think it took a long time for me to realize how much of an impact a lot of that had on me psychologically. So as we're talking about boundaries, but I grew up being very creative, also coming from a poor background and having to really learn how to create what I wanted to for myself, financially and in terms of lifestyle. Like, I started working and doing little odd jobs when I was 8 and babysitting when I was 12, and I had my first job when I was 14, and I was very driven to make changes, also very creative from a young age. And also, because we're going to talk about the woo-woo side, ever since I was little, I've seen and sensed spirits, and very much was like the kid in the Sixth Sense. But other people didn't see these beings, so I thought maybe I was crazy, and I tried to keep it to myself. And it wasn't until many years later, when a family friend described a ghost that I'd seen but never told anyone about, that I knew I wasn't, mentally ill, because someone else can't see a hallucination. so so anyway, that was all there. I proceeded to, as an adult, live my life very analytically. I went and got a job and a master's degree and got married. And I had like all the things that you're supposed to have to, have a successful life. I've got advanced degree, check, fancy job, check, husband, check, house, check, right? Doing all the things. And essentially, it all came tumbling down. And I was unemployed, in a toxic marriage, physically ill, no money, like basically all the aspects of my life that you want to be good were terrible. And so I went to a psychic to try to make sense of my life. And without me telling her anything about all that, she said, you're psychic. And when you blocked out your abilities, you blocked out your intuition, and really encouraged me to start taking classes and open up to this element. And so I did. I started to take psychic training classes, really just to kind of get my life back together because I was in such a mess at that point. And through the process of that, I learned a lot of psychic tools. I learned to see things more clearly because I was only looking at the obvious physical material world before.
Mm.
And I also then went back to my sort of creative roots. So I'd been working in politics and government, and I started, working as an actress, and, started writing and doing some of the things that I think are core to my personality. And it's been quite a process over the years, going, out of politics and government into being a psychic and a creative entrepreneur. And now, I have a pretty amazing life. I just got back from Egypt and Greece and London. I'm working on a new book. I was just in the music studio in London. I don't work a lot of hours. I do creative stuff because that's what I want to do. And over the process of this journey, I have learned a lot about energy and boundaries and sort of spiritual principles about how things work, and how what we allow and accept in terms of boundaries really impacts what we receive in life more than what we think we want, right? So it's really important to have, an idea, a clear destination of what we want to create, but it's our boundaries which will allow or not allow things to come in for us.
Wow. Thank you for sharing all that. And sometimes I forget all of that you've been through, and just also all the wonderful like talents. And I always talk about like our adversity, our gifts in disguise. It's not until we're through it and we look back, we're like, oh, that's why, there was the message, there was the gift. But with that, because of all the noise, like I wonder, and because I get this a lot when I'm talking to clients, like there's so many things that you were dealing with, especially with, growing up. How were you able to turn off the noise, so to speak, and really like trust your gut so that you could know what you want and set like you talk about standards and boundaries? Like how do you do that?
So I think one of the first things I had to do was learn to pay attention to myself and my body and what my body was telling me.
Mhm.
And I'll explain that further in that I think most of us are taught to be very analytical. And women, especially, are taught to be, like you described, pleasers. We're taught to take care of others and focus on others and their needs. And so we often are very shut down in our own bodies and in terms of our own emotional responses or what we need. So the first thing I had to do, and it was a part of my psychic training, was just literally go within to pay attention to what's going on. How am I feeling about this? What is my body telling me about this particular person or situation? And that is number one. Like you're so focused on the external, you literally have no energy boundaries because other people's energies in your field. And then when you're trying to think about what you want, other people's wants are in the place of yours. And so
Yes.
you might even think, I want that, but it's really not your true desire. It's someone else's want for you, but you can't differentiate. So I'm an empath, which means I naturally absorb energy externally. So for me, physical and energetic boundaries are extra important, but I think they are for everybody. And so I had to learn like what's mine and what's not mine because my whole life I assumed that all kinds of things were mine that were not mine, including what I wanted for myself. Like, I think the whole first part of my sort of adult trajectory was literally living other people's expectations. Like what I
Oh,
talked about. It was like, what
yes.
do I want? Oh, I want this husband. I want this job. I want this, lifestyle. But it was not true to my true desire. And as a result of that, it never really manifested right. And so I think that's the number one thing when we talk about boundaries. The first thing is, even energetically, are you aware of you versus not you? Are you aware that you're taking on other people's energy? And then when you're trying to navigate, other people's wants and desires are in the place of yours.
That's really important because so many people who have difficulties with boundaries are caretakers, are really in tune to other people. And it is hard to distinguish. And not only that, even society's expectations, like doing
Oh,
what is
yeah.
just expected. I can't tell you how many times I'll hop on a call with someone and I'll ask them that quintessential question, what do you want? Like, and most people can't really answer me. Most people will answer in ways of what is expected of them or what they think they want or what they wanted back like 20 years ago. So that's the other thing. Cause I wondered, once you get in tune with your own kind of desires and emotions around things, and then you separate from what is theirs and yours, how do you also know, like, almost like in that moment that that's yours and not something from the past, or, what I'm saying? It's not like residual.
Yeah, I think one of the first steps is to do some kind of activity which helps you to release foreign energy. So, taking a salt bath,
Mm.
meditating. There's a lot of Hertz frequency music I love. That's something that I've recently kind of discovered, which is so powerful. Where you can just Google or put into YouTube Hertz music for relaxation, Hertz music for
Oh,
empowerment, and Hertz meaning HC is short for Hertz, like the sound frequency.
uh-huh.
That's great. There's so many tools. Walking in nature, doing these kind of like tree baths or whatever. Walking, all these things that help you kind of get back to yourself, your core, and then feel into what you want. And so, a very powerful and simple thing you can do is to think about some kind of activity, relationship situation, and just feel in your body, what is your response? Most people are not doing that. The body is very, wise in this way. And we have learned in many cases to override whatever that feeling is with a thought or logic.
Mm.
And often that's related to, expectation, like you talked about.
Hmm.
So that was a huge thing for me, just starting to pay attention to my own feelings in my body. And like I realized that I was frequently in codependent dynamics and situations with men. And then when I stopped to feel into that, I realized I was not feeling good in my body with certain people.
Ah,
But I had never
huge.
even really stopped to do that before. It was just like I was taking things kind of on face value, or this person seems professional, or they seem nice, or whatever, whatever the programming says. And so it was a major sort of rewiring of how I approach life, to sit with, well, what does this feel? Not what is appearing, not what makes sense, but how does this feel in my body? So I think that's the number one sort of boundary thing, is to get back in touch with our bodies. And honestly, I feel like a lot of your listeners are women. I know you have male listeners, but I think this is especially hard for women because we're so oriented to be pleasers, based on current society, that's so external. And so it sometimes it's hard to do, but it's very important. And I also will say, I think a lot of healthy men are attracted to women that are really in their emotion, right? And aware of themselves, because
Absolutely. Well,
that's
healthy ones are,
healthy men. That's what I'm saying. Healthy masculine men
Yes.
actually
Yes.
really like that. And it's really important for just your own, health, wellness, mindset. So that's the number one, is feeling in your body. And then also, just once you can feel into what feels good, then you can tune into different decisions. Okay,
Yeah.
now I know this feel like, if I'm connecting with something that doesn't feel good, I feel heaviness in my chest, or I feel like a little bit of nausea, or you can start to identify the sort of feeling patterns in your body, and then you can feel into different choices or outcomes. Okay, so getting that master's degree, when I feel into my body, how does that feel? you know, when I'm thinking
Hmm.
of taking this job, how does that feel in my body? That's one of the first things you can do to get reacquainted with yourself and start to establish healthy energy boundaries. And then you'll start to be able to tell when something is intruding, like when someone has intrusive energy, and you could feel that as like almost like a pressure. Like in my case, I'll actually feel someone's energy kind of intruding in my safe and then that space, and I can say like, no thanks.
I'm glad you distinguished that, because people might be listening to this is like, well, how do I know what even feels good and what doesn't feel good? Like, what is, and it's probably different for everybody, but I'm glad you were describing some of that. And, the other thing around what you're saying is that there's so many, at least the clients that I work with, they have trouble even accessing feelings, period. Like not even just like the visceral part, but just what they have no awareness that something is happening. And so by
Yeah.
doing this, what you're saying, I think is even just a great first step to understand that there is a feeling happening. You don't even have to label it yet, but there is something
Yes.
happening in the body. So when your stomach is kind of churning, then it's understanding, well, how can we label that? Right. So it's like, I guess the first step is that awareness piece and understand something's happening. How did you learn how to like label then the feeling?
Well, I do think it's very helpful to get guidance in some form. So take
Yeah.
classes, there's breathwork meditation, there's psychic classes, there's all kinds of things that are going to help you get in touch with your body and reconnect with your sense. I teach, programs. There's all kinds of stuff out there. I have free meditations on like Insight Timer under Laura Powers 44, but just taking quiet space and time is a really great first step, and to just sit with yourself and just trust that whatever is coming up is for a reason, because that's the first thing we tend to do, is dismiss anything that's not extremely obvious and logical and physical, and especially when there's been some kind of abuse or trauma, we've actually been
Mm.
taught to not trust ourselves, right?
So true.
Like
Yes.
gaslighting or narcissist abuse. There's all kinds of things that can happen where your own internal response, someone has told you that's not actually correct. And then you have complete distrust for yourself. So it's a process. I want everyone to know that this is a process and it's not like all of a sudden you're just going to figure it out 100%, but you learn over time. And I think pattern recognition is really important. So as I started to pay attention to more to my body, energy, kind of psychic tools and information, I started to look at people and how it would feel around them and patterns. And there's another book I would recommend for people that maybe are trying to just even understand their own physiological responses. And it's called What Every Body is Saying. And it's
Mm.
written by a man who is a consultant for law enforcement in tough criminal cases.
Oh,
And it's
cool.
literally about what are the physiological cues that give information. And the
Mm.
fascinating thing is I read that and I realized that I was not even reading my own physical cues. Like, for example, and this is very helpful for dating, for example, if you are liking someone and want to connect them, you will point towards them. Your feet will aim
Yeah.
towards them. And if you don't, your feet will aim because on an unconscious level, you're like want to run away.
Right. Right. I know the
So
body language stuff is crazy, isn't
it's
it? Yeah,
crazy, but it's so helpful
it
because
is.
I realized while I was diving into stuff, there would be someone I would be talking with, and I realized my feet are pointed away. And on some level, I do not like this person or their energy. And that's really important information. So just to, learn the physiological body language cues, start feeling into your body, even if it feels weird and you're not sure, just take note. That's one of the first steps.
I love that because, a lot of times I'll have people do something called data dating when they go out. So I like to take the analytical part of what so many of my clients are, like to your point, what you were talking about, but putting it into a system that makes sense while they're dating so that they use the logic to understand the emotion. And that could be a great piece for them because
Yes.
I'll
Yeah. Like
ask.
where are your feet pointed? Do you like this person?
Exactly,
Yes.
exactly. Well, no, and also, like, figuring out what's going on in their body and how they're
Mm-hmm.
feeling, because I can't tell you, I'll ask clients to journal how they felt after the date, and if they haven't been trained and worked on this yet, they'll describe the date in facts rather than the feeling. And it's a big distinction because if you keep getting attracted to, let's say, narcissists or fixer uppers or toxic, whatever, call it what you will, and you haven't learned that feeling that you get every single time, then how can you recognize the pattern to your point, And so, no, this is really important before we even set the boundary.
Absolutely. I think pattern recognition is literally one of the most important things for success in life. Like even if like you've
Yeah.
had a clusterfuck of a situation,
Right. Right.
like this happened with my ex-husband, I was like, okay, that was horrible. But now there are some things I can note, like this was an associative thing with this other bad thing, right? So, like, when those
Yes.
things would come up, I would be like, something to pay attention to. Like, for example, I'm very wary of people that are extra charming, like super charming.
Yeah.
Like, if you're really charming, like, why are you trying so hard? There's something in there, right? So much of this is about us figuring out these different things that'll help us have an easier path and get more clarity moving forward. But you're right. I think most women are not taught, well, people, period, but it's especially for women, um, like how do you feel? And it's all a logical response. But what logic and feeling are they're like two different parts of the brain. It's not the same. And you
Yeah.
cannot I think be successful in life if you're not in touch with that feeling aspect.
Well, and men too, I think it just manifests itself differently. And whereas women, I think, are more in tune to other people's feelings over themselves. So they may understand a feeling, but not for themselves. Men have a lot of trouble just accessing feelings, period. And they're not as in tune with themselves or with others. So either way, it's so important. You can't set a boundary unless you really understand what makes you feel a certain way. And so I'd love to talk about the next step. So like once people have that kind of gut response and now they're having a better understanding what feels good, what doesn't, what they want to say yes and no to, Do you teach, or maybe like there were some hacks for yourself on how to communicate then the boundary?
Well, yeah, I think first all there's two parts. And by the way, I have like a mastermind. I do one-on-one clients. So there's lots of different ways you can connect with me if you're feeling drawn in. The big thing is there's two parts. There's like, what are you communicating physically to individual
Mhm.
people or situations? But there's also like the sort of overall message you're giving to the universe.
Ah, yeah.
Right. So
Right.
sometimes it's a conversation with like individuals, and sometimes there's a conversation with like an individual or an entity that's not even necessarily a person that's kind of communicating overall. So I'll give you an example from my recent history, which is I travel a lot, as we talked about. And I had a situation, I'm not going to say the hotel chain, but it was a very well known high end hotel chain where something happened that was very unacceptable. And they came back. I ended up speaking with the general manager, and he offered me essentially like a small number of points for that hotel. Right. And I think he thought, well, this will be fine. And I said to him, yeah, I don't think that's really acceptable. And here's why. And then he came back and he's like, okay, I'm going to give you a full refund. And
Mm.
I'm sharing this, and I think that was actually the appropriate response given what had happened because they handled it. I'm not going to say the specifics, but this happens where whatever we sort of assert and enforce is what we end up receiving again
Yes.
and again. So if you accept narcissist, or you accept someone who's taking you for granted, like we're talking dating terms here, you're going to continue to get that again and again because that's what you're saying yes to. That's what
Hmm.
you're accepting, even if you're not like saying yes again, even if you're not saying no, that is like a yes in terms of the
Yes.
universal terms.
Yeah, 100%. And also like in relation to what you and I were talking about off air, just the standards that you're setting for yourself
Absolutely.
too,
You're
right?
saying like this is acceptable or this is not acceptable.
Right.
And it's no one else is going to enforce that for yourself but you. So you have to say, like, no, this isn't it. And this is really important when you're thinking about what type of partner you want in terms of love and dating and relationships. Like if you don't have a very hard, clear line, for certain things, for example, that you will get that over and over again. What isn't that until you assert that boundary?
Yeah, and really the other thing is, well, and I think it's everything that we're talking about. You really teach people how to treat you, you know? And so if you don't
Yes.
like the people in your life or how you're being treated, you have to look in the mirror. It's like, what are you doing to create that for yourself? But as powerful as you are in a negative sense, you can be just as powerful in a positive sense and to get that. But it does go back to that self-worth too. Like you went through that transformation when you were in that dark place. And I was wondering, just how you turned, like how when you were hitting rock bottom and you weren't demanding that standard for yourself, obviously there was just like that, kind of circle or loop you were in. At what point did you shift? Do you remember? And like, do you have any advice around that for other people?
Yeah, well, I think there were several points that were important. So it definitely wasn't like a one thing and all of a sudden everything was. So I
Right,
just want
right.
everyone to know, like, for me, I feel like there were several points that were
It wasn't
significant.
just
And
a
then
red dress like with me. No, just
yeah, yeah. Well, so I will say there was a definite big shift for me with angels, and I had an angelic visitation experience where I felt the angels come in. I heard them, I felt them around me, and I knew that whatever I was going through at that point, I was not alone. So if your spiritual beliefs support that, I definitely recommend calling on angels and asking for help. But one of the first messages I got once I was connecting in with my intuitive element and the angels was the importance of just getting out of there, right? Like it was like, get out of this situation, get out of this relationship, and also follow that
Mhm.
faith, follow your feeling, the feeling. So I decided the economy was terrible at this point because it was during the housing bubble burst and recession. And I'd had a contract position which ended. And by the time the contract position ended, no one was hiring, especially I was in higher education. Like no one was hiring. And the jobs I was applying for, they're all like, you're super overqualified. I was just looking for anything at that point, right? Which is also a big problem. Don't ever just accept anything.
Right.
Of course, nothing was working for me. But essentially I was being sort of reoriented, right? And shifting into different work. And I felt guided to go to live in China and just have this kind of international adventure. And I decided to teach English, and I needed my TEFL certificate to do that. So again, this was all intuitively guided information, and I could have gotten a certificate anywhere, but I felt to go do it in Spain with like no money. I had no money. But you know what? When I felt into the idea of going to Spain, it felt fucking amazing.
Ah, there it
So
is.
here's the feeling
Yeah,
part. Now that's the problem
right.
is most of us will feel into something like that, and then our logical mind will be like, no, that doesn't make sense. I can't do that. It's impossible. That's dumb. Like fill in the blank, whatever.
Right, right.
But I was in this process of like, well, how I've been living my life have led to me to a very difficult situation. That approach clearly didn't work for me very well. So I was
Right.
like, well, let's just try this other approach. So with like $500 to my name, I went to Spain for 5 weeks. And what's interesting is that I made the choice to go without really knowing how I was going to pay for it. And then I had something shift, and I received a lump sum of money, which funded that, and then travels to Europe afterwards. But if I do get the message psychically that if I hadn't said yes, that money wouldn't have presented itself to me.
Uh, So
Right. So just
true.
that faith, that sort of faith, and like choosing the energy that feels good, you know?
Mhm,
So I
mhm.
learned through that process of like follow that feeling is way
Mhm.
better than following pure logic. Now, don't get me wrong, logic has its place, but that served me very well. It was extremely impactful and profound for me, that whole trip to Europe that I did. And then I've essentially lived my life that way ever since, following the feeling and the intuition versus the logic. And a lot of that intuition is what is am I feeling in my body at that time? Not just about a person, but even an idea, a situation, a location.
Mhm. And what's so great about what you're talking about too, I want to go back to what you said about trust, because a lot of what I think you learned was to trust your gut, trust your own feeling around what
Yes.
it is that you wanted. And this is just the therapist in me, often people become people pleasers to begin with because there's some sort of message that you can't trust yourself in some way, shape, or form, right? And so you're constantly gaining approval somehow, right? That's the people pleaser. Like you're trying to get that from somebody. It could be a parental figure, it could be a teacher, but like wherever it comes from. And so the fact that you can train yourself to override that and say, wait a second, I got this. Like, I know what I want. I can trust this. That's when you're gonna create that healthy boundary too, because it's authentically you. Like, that's what you're not doing it from any other place. So, that was so important for you to go through to hit rock bottom and go to Spain with 500 bucks to say, "Wow, like, I survived that. I can trust myself," and so many other decisions moving forward, and that so relates to dating. So, like, there's so many people who don't trust themselves to pick the right man, to pick the right woman, right? Like, so I'm just really
Yeah.
glad you brought that up.
Thank you. And I think it's two parts. It's trusting yourself, but it's also trusting the universe, essentially, right? It's
Oh,
trusting,
yeah.
like, I trust that I'm going to be taken care of. I trust that if I follow what feels good, in a, guided and boundaried way, that it's going to work out for me. And honestly, there's so many examples in history of this. I was just watching the new docu-series that's about Alexander the Great.
Mm,
Really interesting. But, you know, when we go past what we think is logical, we often greatness comes, right? But we have to have that leap, that faith. And most of us are living lives that are so safe, and I'm putting this in quotes, that we're suffocated,
mm,
which is
mhm,
actually not safe. If you're
mhm.
suffocated, it's actually not safe. But that's the training, that's what we're taught. And if something is guided, if something is an alignment for us, it really doesn't matter whether it's logical or not.
Yeah,
It really doesn't.
good reminder.
And I
Mhm.
think also with relationships, to put this in another term, our intuition, our feeling doesn't matter whether it's logical, because it can go the other way too, where I've been in relationships where on paper that was a fabulous person and it was
Mhm.
actually really toxic, right?
Mhm.
Or
Mhm.
really not aligned for me. And so it's really important that we learn to pay attention to our intuition, our body, and trust that and trust the universe that we can have what we truly desire instead of just what we're told we can have.
Thank you for that. I sometimes I get so practical and tactical that you're setting such a great reminder of there's so much of it that it is just that, like what you're saying. It's the universe and it's bigger. We forget that a lot of times, and it's all encompassing. There's not just one thing here that we're talking about. It's important to pay attention to everything.
And the universe is magical and abundant, and there's so much out there.
Mhm.
So, not to be limited by whatever it is that we perceive in the short term. And also, I'm getting guided to say that it's really important that we surround ourselves with people who believe in the magic, who are growing,
Mm.
because the feedback sort of loop that we can get from the people in our circle is really significant. And we want that feedback to be helpful feedback and
Yeah.
not sabotaging feedback. And maybe your family, who, by the way, a lot of people mean well, but they just have unhealthy beliefs or beliefs that don't support growth or possibility. Uh, you know, coworkers, friends. So it's just really important that we are mindful of that and asking, is my current circle or are those I'm connecting with, is that supporting the vision of their life that I want to have? Because that's one of the major shifts that I had to make, was a complete I know you talk about like image, it's sort of remodeling or reworking or makeover of my circle to
Yeah.
reflect the future and the lifestyle that I wanted. And by the way, I'm not coming from a place of judgment, because this is really about a person's energy and their beliefs. So I'm not talking about,
Mhm.
how they appeared, or I'm just talking about like, are they believing, or is my circle in belief of the possibilities and able
Yeah.
to go on this journey and support me on it?
Yeah, no, and the thing, and it's kind of coming full circle as we end here, it's so perfect, is that when you learn how to set healthy boundaries, you definitely shed the people that are not serving you and you invite people who really do. And it can be rocky when you're going through that transformation. Like I remember working with a client who when she got stronger and she started setting boundaries and saying no and saying yes to the things that she did, like the friends that she had did not like it. And it really like came to the surface of what kind of friends they really were. But she couldn't see it when she was in that other people pleasing moment, in her life, because she was so used to people who were takers. And for the first time, she's like, no, I'm not going to take this anymore. And it was hard. It was hard to get rid of some of those people. But because, it's just like clearing a closet, you make room for the new clothes. She cleared out those friendships and a whole new set of people started chiming in who really did serve her, like you were saying. So, oh my gosh, I could go on and on with you. See, again, we did this again. I'm like, how did the time go already?
It does go by fast.
Ah, well, anyway, so just, I don't know if you have any last words of wisdom that you wanted to share. And also, please let everybody know how they can find you if anything cool coming up that you want to share too.
Yeah, so I would say, whatever you envision, you can have that or a version of that, right? I'm not saying it's like you can have Tom Cruise specifically, although maybe you can.
Well,
I
maybe
don't,
you
whatever,
can.
but
Yeah,
I'm
don't
just saying
limit
whatever it
that.
is, like, that or better,
Right.
or that, or, whatever is in line. I have a friend who, he literally envisioned working and loved this particular superstar, and then he ended up working with him later on. It's like we are incredibly powerful manifestors.
Mhm.
So really set our visions for what it is that we want to bring in and create, and tell the universe that or better, and then be open to what comes forward, and then continue to ask and honor that information that comes forward. What in me is not in alignment with that version of my reality?
Mhm.
Because we are probably going to be guided to release, like you talked about, relationships, clothing, things in the closet. I just had a realization the other day where um a year ago I was like trying to figure out some bigger picture things in terms of where I was living and property, and I put some things in storage, and I just went to my storage and it was like, oh my God, I need to get rid of all this furniture in here. And it was like such a like relief. Like I didn't even realize that was weighing on me. So just constantly being aware of those things that feel like a weight and then releasing them, whatever
Mm.
those are, beliefs, relationships, belongings, and just keep asking what is not in alignment with this vision for my life that I have myself, and then just keep going. Just basically don't stop until you get there.
I love it. I love it. Where can everyone find you?
Oh, sure. My website is healingpowers.net. You can also reach me at bookings at laurapowers.net. I'm on social media, Instagram, Laura Powers 44, which is an angel number. Yeah, reach out. Love to connect with you. And thank you so much, Kimmy. It's always such a pleasure to connect with you.
Oh my God. Thank you. Thank you. And we'll just have to keep doing this. That's all.
Absolutely.
And thank you for joining me today. This has been the Charisma Quotient. And I'm your host, of course, Kimmy Seltzer. And remember, you can build confidence, make connections, and find love from the outside in. And if you want to know more, make sure you go to my site, as always, kimmyseltzer.com. And if you have a hard time listening to your gut to know what is right for you and need help setting boundaries when dating, hop on a personal call with me to help map out a plan and strategy to help you, or contact Laura. Like, we're honestly, it takes a village. That's what I always say. So just click the link you see in the show notes. And remember, working on you is working on your dating life. That's all for now.